He was a morbidly obese surgeon destined for an operating table and an early death. Now he's a rebel MD who is fabulously fit and fighting to make America healthy again. This is Stay Off My Operating Table with Dr. Philip Ovadia.
Welcome back, folks. It's the Stay Off My Operating Table podcast with Dr. Philip Ovadia. Phil, I'm going to do something a little different. I want to read something. The cartography of the known world is defined by lines where certainty and dogma drop into void seas. Where I am is at once the everywhere that has marked me, the nowhere that has mocked me, the anywhere that has shunned me, the somewhere that has summoned me, ether, vacuum, which, as you know, is not empty, but the sum of 0-point fields. This is taken from the biography of our guest today. It touched me. I'm pretty sure we've never had a Guggenheim Fellow on the show, but apparently we do today.
Yes, we do.
Take it away.
I think there'll be a number of firsts. I'm very excited to have Dr. Vyvyane Loh on today. Vyvyane, I'm going to say, is one of the smartest physicians I know, and that's probably one of the least interesting things about her. Ultimately, I've been fortunate to meet Vyvyane a few years ago and work with her kind of in the metabolic health space and really learn a lot from her, and really enjoy listening to her on podcast and all of that. So excited to jump right in. Vyvyane, why don't you start by just giving a little bit of your background, and you can focus on the medical part of that, or you can wrap in some of the more interesting parts of that as well.
Okay, wow. I never quite know where to start, but
Well, your local word nerd is going to want to know word stuff too.
maybe I'll just start by telling you that I actually never wanted to be a doctor, but I knew very young that I wanted to be a healer. I don't know where that word came from, but I did say that to my mother. I said, I want to be a healer. And she suggested doctor, and I thought, I don't know if that fits. I ultimately ended up in med school here in Boston, which is where I've stayed. Okay, I'm not that smart, Philip. I'm still in Boston. I'm trying to get out. I've sworn this is my last
Thank you.
winter. I need to get away. So yeah, I think that I don't have the street smarts there. But I've been in Boston for undergrad, for med school, for residency. Oh my God, it's sounding more depressing as I keep going on. But what I've done here was, I needed to think about what I wanted to do in medicine. And I had the gift of burning out very early in my career, 2 years out from residency. And I found myself completely burned out.
It's really important that people understand what you just said. The gift of burning out 2 years into your residency.
Right after, 2 years after my
2 years
residency.
after your residency.
Yeah.
Pack that.
As a new attending, I was sort of the lowest person to join a very large and prestigious primary care practice. So that meant that I took on everybody's work while the partners went golfing, right? That's really the hierarchy. And I ended up not only covering their patients, my own patient load, so that in a day, my outpatient load was in the range of 27 patients. And then I also covered, nursing home patients. I covered the inpatient before we had hospitalists. I covered the inpatients. And so I just found myself working around the clock. And I had gotten to a point where I was so burnt out. I didn't even know it at first, So I remember just being so dissociated from my body that at one point I found myself, it was a 1 week vacation that I was on, and I found myself tearing, tears running down my face. And I thought to myself, I must have allergies. And I sat there It was on the beach, probably somewhere in Florida, with tears running down my eyes for a week and wondering about this strange allergy that I had. I had no idea what it was. I was so disconnected from my body. And then, several weeks later, I found myself in a place where I didn't recognize myself and I knew I had to stop. And at that point, I actually, to make a very long story short, I handed in my resignation. And this was no small decision at that point in time because, I had bills to pay. I had no way of knowing how I was going to support myself. And there were a lot of other things on the line. I made that decision because I realized that I couldn't really, in good conscience, take care of anyone else when I was so sick myself, when I was so tired, when my mind was foggy, and I didn't care when I went in. I just didn't care because I was so burnt out. And again, the short version, the compressed version is I went on to have what I call my year of silence. I was just watching the thoughts in my head and I realized that they weren't very helpful and they were very negative and coming from a very dark place. And then I just became, so Jack, we were talking a little bit about words, and I'm highly sensitive to words. I became very aware of the words that were seeping into my head on a daily basis from listening to songs, conversations around me. And I just decided, okay, I need to clean out my head. And so I imposed a year of silence where I really didn't talk to anyone unless it was absolutely necessary. But the other thing was also I banned all music except instrumental because I listened to some lyrics, of popular songs, and I thought, that is crazy. And I'm singing these songs, it's going in my head, right? And I just decided I need to curate the words that are going into my head better. So I stopped that. And, if I were standing near someone and I heard conversations that were negative or just weren't very helpful, I had this thing where I would hit delete in my head. And so I'd make this little gesture and I'd hear the little trash can sound, like that in my head. And my friends would be like, what are you doing? And I was always hitting delete whenever it was something that was not productive. So I learned to clean up my mind and delete, 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 and just to have this moment of silence. And then, as I said, to curate the thoughts and the words that went into my head. So I selected what I wanted to put in. I spent a lot of time reading. They say that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And because
Yes.
I didn't spend a lot of time with many, I was just thinking, how do I make this work? And I realized it doesn't have to be in the actual presence of someone. It could be, someone that I read, someone from another century. So I read a lot of Rilke and, some of these poets that I really enjoy and that I get so much from. And, I selected the 5 poets and writers that I wanted to spend the most time with. And that's kind of how I spent the year, just cleaning out my mind and my soul and my spirit. And then realizing that, Phil, I know you can relate to this. We're supposed to take care of people, but nobody taught us how to take care of ourselves. And so you take the brightest people with the best intentions, and then you proceed to dumb them down and burn them out. That's what our system does. And then you wonder why, people are leaving the profession and so forth. So I say it was a gift because 2 years out from training, I noticed this. And I realized if I can't take care of myself, I can't take care of anyone. And then it became this journey to learn what I didn't learn in medical school, right? They never taught us about nutrition. They never taught us about sleep, except to just not sleep, right? They never taught us about exercise. And the strange thing is, anytime someone wants to start an exercise program or go on a diet, they're asked to check with their physician who knows nothing about this, but somehow they're supposed to check with us, right? And I'm like, what am I supposed to tell you? I had 0 hours in my med school curriculum on any of these topics. And that was when I realized, okay, I am going to have to find a way to learn this before I can take care of others. Because, you wouldn't go to a dentist with rotting teeth.
Yes.
So why are we going to doctors who are burnt out and sick and not healthy in their heads, right? Who've been, kind of put in a system where they have to suffer moral injury every day. And then they're told, oh, you burn out, as if it's our fault.
Oh
It's
my
not, or
gosh,
as if you're not,
I've never
as
heard
if,
anyone say it that way.
yeah, as if we're
That is
not tough
beautiful.
enough. You're burning out. I'm like, no, daily we have to face this moral injury of doing things that we know are not right for our patients. And then you wonder why we're in such, decline in terms of our mental health. So it's just the way the system was set up. And I realized I needed to change the way I practice. So I don't know. Are you regretting that you asked that question? Because
No, not
Not
at all.
at
That's
all.
amazing. I guess it takes most doctors a very long time, if ever, for them to start to recognize that, that sort of moral injury that you talk about. I think most doctors don't recognize that what they're doing for their patients is maybe, discordant with what their real goals were in becoming a physician.
that's right.
Um,
And then day after day, we do that, knowing better, right? And as you said, our intention was never that. We were never trained that way. And after a while, you get to this point of you have to dissociate in some way to be able to continue. And many people have families and, they have responsibilities. So, you find yourself in a position where you can't easily back away. But at the same time, you're doing something that isn't necessarily really helping your patient and maybe promotes a different agenda, because after all, the entire business model is no one gets paid till you get sick. That's the entire business model. So when people talk to me about changing medicine, I'm like, you set up the system, the business model is already there. You got to change the business model or else nothing will change. But no one will talk about that, right? It's all kumbaya, but let's be real.
Oh, I love her. Okay, Phil, I want to read something else.
Oh,
Every day there is another one, another patient that ends up on my operating table because they have not been properly informed and educated about how to remain healthy. Nearly 700,000 people die each year because of heart disease, and the problem is getting worse instead of better. When we solve the heart disease epidemic and people are in control of their health, we can avoid chronic disease. People will remain vibrant and healthy in their older years. We will be able to keep pace with our grandchildren and our great grandchildren. The need for heart surgeons like myself will be eliminated. The entire healthcare system will be revolutionized and downscaled. People will be able to focus on health instead of healthcare. That was written by our own host, Dr. Philip Ovadia. I had to pull that in here after reading your bio, Vyvyane. We so often talk science, biology, neurology, chemistry on this show, and it's wildly important. But what we have happening right now is we have two people who've devoted their lives to healing talking to one another. And I just think it's extraordinary. You two have both gone deeper and have gotten down to the roots of the problem. And I'd love to hear more from both of you about the steps that you both are taking to return to the roots of being a healer instead of whatever the medical system tries to turn you into.
yeah, I think, Phil, I mean, what you have done and just promoting the awareness that you don't necessarily need to have, the progression and the end course of being on, an operating theater, right, with your heart and with your health. And I think having a surgeon speak out against that is very powerful because, again, no one makes money till you get sick. And in that model, that's how you survive. That's how you make a living. And yet you speaking out and, letting people know that's really not where we should be going. That's a powerful message.
Yeah, thank you for that, Vyvyane. And, in the same way that you were able to recover from your burnout. I mean, most people 2 years into a career, whether it be medicine or something else, and they burn out from it, they're not coming back.
Yeah,
and
that's
yet,
right.
you found a way to come back, and I would say come back much better and stronger. And it's now many more than 2 years since that, and you're still doing it and really getting better. So talk a little bit about maybe what that recovery was like to get back into medicine, to change the way that you're approaching things, and to really, as Jack said, get back to the healing that we all intended to do.
Yeah, it was a very long journey. The first step was trying to take care of myself and sort of learn about what was important in self-care, right? At the same time, Phil, I had gotten a scholarship to get my MFA in fiction right at that time. So that was when I sort of had a split life because I was doing this program at Warren Wilson College, getting my MFA in fiction. And at the same time, I was practicing, but I was doing mostly inpatient hospitalist work because that would allow me sort of shift time, right? So it was really one of the loveliest times of my life because I was able to now spend time with my writing. And that was also when I did a lot more of my dance and choreography and so forth, really kind of exploring the side of me that had not had that much freedom to blossom because I was just always doing the sciences and school and so forth for med school. So I was doing that. And then at the same time, seeing patients, but I also realized that there was a lot of overlap, right? Because as a writer, what you do is observe, you listen, right? You are deeply interested in motivations and human nature, right? And just kind of connecting with characters. So what I did with patients was not very dissimilar. And the other thing was that I realized that most of what we do, Phil, are full-time jobs. I wish they'd tell students in med school this. Your full-time job is telling people things they don't want to hear. Right?
Wow.
That's your full-time job. Mrs. Smith, I'm afraid it's cancer. We have to amputate. Your son's not coming back. He's in a coma, right? Every day. That's our full-time job, telling people things they don't want to hear. Your kidney's failing. So how do we then, A, get them to hear what we're saying, right? That's our job, is to make it safe for them to hear. It's to make it clear so that they can hear this. And none of this is taught in medical school, right? The communication aspects. And, that's your full time. Every day you go in and you're going to have to tell people things they don't want to hear. Okay. And I think as a writer, it really helped me think about the character's point of view and therefore the patient's point of view, their motivations, what's important to them. And then that communication to them takes that into account. And I think that really helped me in communicating with patients and understanding where they were coming from. I think that was really a big part of my own learning to be a doctor, but it didn't come from med school. It just came from life and doing something else, right? Being a writer. I got my book out and, I was at a crossroads thinking about whether I just wanted to keep going on the writing route or, what should I do about medicine? Now, I never considered stopping medicine because I felt that it was, I had a medical degree. I'd gone to med school. I had taken a place. So many people were trying to get into med school and get that degree, and I had this. I felt it was unconscionable to just drop it and not practice. That at some level, I still needed to practice, because if I went and did that, then I still need to honor, the fact that I can practice and that I had a duty to help people. So I always, but in what capacity? So I was struggling with this. And I remember I was at Bread Loaf as a fellow. So this is a writers' conference. It's in Vermont. I had gone as a scholar, and then they invited me back as a fellow. And I was working with a writer. And so as a fellow, you help out in the workshops. You do the critique of manuscripts together with the main faculty. One day we went out for a walk during the conference, and she was just telling me, and she had, I don't know, about 8 books out. So she was just telling me how she just gotten to this point where she felt like, what's the point? I write all these books, and yeah, but she said, I envy you. And I said, maybe why? She's, I only have 1 book. You have 8 books. And she said, because I don't know what I'm doing with these books. I don't know if anyone really reads them, if it makes a difference, but you get to go in and help people. At the end of the day, you can go home and feel like you've done something to help someone. And that sank really deep. And I was thinking about that. And she said, because, I can write another book, a 10th book, a 12th book. But at the end of the day, you get to say that, you helped someone. And I thought about that. And that was when I really kind of, reevaluated my relationship with medicine. And that's when I decided, okay, if you're going to go back, then, you could do so many other things in your life. If you're going to go back, you're going to have to do something to change the system. Otherwise, why bother? Because there are many ways to make a living, many ways to make money, many ways to be successful. So if you're going to choose this route, it better be, that you're going to do something more than just make a living. And that's when I thought, okay, then maybe I'll try to change this in some way. So that was how I went back to medicine. And then I did work for a few years, with other clinics, and I was a consultant in a hospital. But then I decided that to take this further, you can't build something new from within a broken system. You just can't, because you're always going to be shackled. Some manager's going to be over you, 5 committees, the budget, la, 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 la. And I realized, listen, I want to spend my life energy doing the work that I came here to do. I don't want to spend my life energy convincing you to let me do the work that I came. It's just like, that's too much of a waste of my time. So, just cut loose. And I went out on my own. And that's really when I spent the last 10 years, Philip, just delving into all the things they didn't teach us in med school. The medical school curriculum, and I mentor some med students, so I'm quite aware, even today, the medical school curriculum is about 50 years old, right? And, they make it a little flashier and stuff, but you're not really learning anything new. Now, the biological sciences have moved so far ahead. And this huge gap, no one is bridging this gap, right? And that was when I felt, a lot of the stuff we learned just served the system. It was algorithmic. If you see X, do Y. Again, you take the brightest people and then, this is what you give them. And there's no thinking, no challenge, and no real kind of approach to the patient from an organic point of view and from the point of view of health, which comes from the word "hale," which means whole, right? This seeing the patient. Instead, we have these silos, pulmonary and cardiology, and we just throw them into little buckets as if we were just different organ systems. But we forget that it just works together as a whole. So I had to spend the last 10 years piecing together, this wholeness and how things interact, and also trying to move away from the simplistic approach, right? That a lot of times I see people going after that, oh, you just do this one thing, you just take this one supplement. And I mean, Homo sapiens would not have survived if we didn't have all these backup mechanisms. You know, you stop one route or pathway, we divert, we'll go around it, right? Because otherwise, you know, somewhere in year 2, it would have been like, kadunk, and you're gone. Okay. The Neanderthals would have taken over or something. But for us to have survived so long, we had this flexibility and we were able to reroute in many of the molecular pathways and the metabolic pathways and so forth. So just understanding that and realizing that there's a lot of complexity because it's a systems approach and not a simplistic one switch approach. That's the other thing I was really interested in, and trying to bring that into clinical relevance, because you have the biological sciences, you have medicine, which is far behind and dictated by algorithms, but somewhere in there we have to bridge it and find, you know, a way to practice clinically, practically, that, you know, is more up to date in terms of science, but also takes into account that, you know, we don't know all the different routes and molecular pathways yet. There's so many missing pieces. But what is most relevant now? Where can you get the biggest bang for your buck nutritionally, in terms of activity, in terms of sleep, in terms of, you know, our daily practices, our lifestyle practices? So that's kind of the approach I took.
I think it's fascinating how you just described that, because when I tell people about what we do on this podcast, I, I've heard the message enough that I think I've started to absorb it, that health is composed of what we eat, how we move, how we sleep, and how we manage stress. Kind of those 4 things. And it's always been astonishing to me how little those 4 things are actually addressed
Yeah.
by the air quotes healthcare system. I know we want to talk about your obesity medicine work. So let's say for sure we want to talk about that. But I'd love to hear you kind of expand a little bit how those things all play into health. Those, particularly the stress management, which sounds to me like something you figured out on your own.
You know, so many things come to mind, but let's just go back to what you said about health. And, you know, this doesn't come from me entirely. It's from a model that a very famous immunologist put out. His name is Ruslan Mechitov. Follow him, kind of a little groupie here because I love the work he does. But, you know, I was listening to him talk about health in terms of robustness and resilience, right? So robustness, where we don't get sick easily, and resilience, if you get sick, you can come back easily and regain health. And then I thought about also just one other R in my own mind, this idea of being not reactive, but responsive to our environment, right? So especially with human beings, because we have our minds. And so there's this robustness and resilience that we see in organisms when we talk about health. But I think adding to that, another R, the idea of responsiveness to our environment and to whatever is around us, is how I envision health. Because the healthcare system or the sick care system has a very low bar right now. It's just absence of disease, which is the lowest of the low in terms of defining health, right? So I like to think of robustness, resilience, and, you know, responsiveness to the world around us, and think of those R's in terms of health. And of course, you know, we are made to build and to also break down tissue. We're built in cycles. And so learning to respond to those cycles, those circadian cycles, to feedback cycles, that's one huge component, like you said, Jack, that's not taught. And so if we look at feeding, if we look at nutrition, sleep, exercise, repair, recovery, these are all in cycles. And, you know, do we understand those cycles? Do we understand the different components involved? A lot of times I hear doctors talk about inflammation and needing to get rid of inflammation. But again, if we think in terms of cycle, the immune system is inflammation and anti-inflammation, right? If you have too much inflammation, then, you get, for example, breakdown of tissue and so forth, a lot of destruction in the body. But too much anti-inflammation is what happens in cancer, for example. You lose your immunosurveillance, right? And, maybe the wound healing aspects get out of control. Now you have fibrosis. This is all part of the immune system. It does both. It doesn't just do inflammation and then we try to, put on the anti-inflammatory aspects. No, the immune system modulates all of it. And understanding the cycles that we go through, inflammation and anti-inflammation. So we have, destruction and then healing, destruction and healing in all our tissues when we engage the immune system, right? So I like thinking in terms of cycles. That's a very big component for me. The other thing is stress. When you're talking to me about stress, I'm thinking, okay, generally, this is not how we're taught, but if you think of it, we think about stress and everybody's thinking about their own particular stress. It's really hard to define. But if we bring it back to the body, which is my favorite way to start, it is a state of arousal. Okay? Simply a state of arousal. How do we detect the arousal? Your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, your breathing goes up, right? And we have these sensations. Okay? Heart rate up, blood pressure up, breathing is up, and Jack, I'm so angry, stressed out because so-and-so said something to me and I'm so angry. Your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up, your breathing goes up, and Jack, I'm terrified. I have this exam tomorrow and I don't know if I'm ready. Your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, your respiratory rate goes up, and Jack, I'm in love. I met, the man of my life or whatever. So you can see the body's response is the same. And that is a state of arousal. It's the stories, there's the writer in me. It's the stories that are creating the stress experience that you're having, right? So that experience is based on the story that's going on in your head. Remember, I started by telling you that I needed to wipe my head clean.
Yes.
And just be very careful about how I curated what went in my head. So when we talk about stress, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay these bills and so forth. And that is, anxiety, right? We call it financial stress. Why is she always like picking a fight with me? She never sees the work that I do. And again, the body experiences it as increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, increased breathing rate, and so forth. There's one physiologic response. There are a million stories.
Wow.
Managing stress for me is managing the stories, right? I mean, in the end, because I could be in love, excited, or I could be in fear, I could be sad, I could be angry, and it's all there's only one physiologic response, but there are a million stories, so I need to pick the right story.
Wow.
That's kind of how I see it. My approach to stress management, maybe because I'm a writer, I'm very interested in the story. Because I know as a doctor, there's only one physiologic response. So tell me the story. And then to manage stress, we're going to have to tweak that story, right? Little editing, right? Back to writing.
Right.
Yeah. Delete, cut out certain paragraphs, rearrange, reframe, right? Change the point of view. There's so many things that you can change, but we're going from the point of view of the story because that is the experience. That is the experience of the stress, right? That we have to address.
And to kind of maybe take that a bit deeper and build on it, when we look at all these diseases that we talk about, heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, whatever, diabetes, and in a similar way, we've gotten so deep in the woods about the end of the story, like the heart disease, the diabetes, the cancer, and we miss that, again, these all come from a common physiologic response, basically,
That's right.
that our body has, or physiologic derangement. And I think that really ties into a lot of the work that you've now been doing, focusing on obesity, but really, again, getting back to this root cause of our diseases.
Absolutely. I mean, almost all chronic diseases, and to my mind, metabolic diseases, right? So I had a conversation with someone a couple of weeks ago, and he was like, no, heart disease is cardiovascular. I'm like, no, it's a metabolic disease. Even the drug companies call it cardiometabolic, right? At this point, they realize that. And in the end, and I started with this in my bio on my website, Jack, about the life force, but essentially, in the end, everything is about energy, right? And metabolism is the regulation and management of energy in your body. And when that is off, when we're not regulating and managing the energy correctly, then, different systems basically become dysfunctional. But we can also look at it the other way, that if we were to exploit metabolism, if we were to exploit energy management, then that will also change, how your body functions. So in the latter case, take cancer, right? And cancer cells are notorious for exploiting and rewiring the metabolism, the regulation of energy in your body, right? And that's why we're looking now at immunometabolism, and a lot of the cancer research is looking at how cancer cells rewire our metabolism and how do we unplug that rewiring and reassert a different wiring, right? So in the end, it's all about energy war, gentlemen, right? Because it's about resources.
Yes.
And whether it's a pathogen, it's a bacteria, it's a virus, it wants resources from you. And your body is about protecting those resources, defending those resources. Cancer cells want resources, and you're defending against them as well. So everybody is battling for energy because energy is life.
I would just like to, I know you get most of this, Phil, but I just want to sit and just bask in these ideas. This is beautiful. It's literally the first time I've ever heard anyone connect the metabolism, what you eat and how your body burns it with the stress situation. Granted, I'm not the brightest bulb on the shelf, but all of a sudden it makes sense. Oh, of course. It's all about energy. It's all about energy.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
all about energy, and also partitioning of energy within the body, and different organ systems are going to be fighting for those resources as well, right? So just to go back to obesity, one of the things that
Yeah.
I've been trying to get across to people who actually are practicing obesity medicine is the one thing I want to say over and over again, because I don't think it's getting, the message is getting out there enough. That is that we know this because we have seen it, and there are studies that show this, that when you have increased fat in your content in your body, okay, you have increased percent body fat, there is a concurrent decrease in blood flow to the brain. Okay. And this
What?
occurs even at BMIs of 26. I hate using BMIs, but the studies were done. And this occurs in 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds. Please don't tell me about, when we get old and blah, blah, blah. Okay. So we
There's
have
decreased
studies,
blood flow to the brain.
decreased cerebral blood flow. This is well known, well documented. I can't tell you how many times I have to say that. Now, at the same time, we worry, we go, wow, why is there young onset dementia? Ooh, why is everybody so anxious these days? Why is everybody, so distractible? Why are we having a lot of mental health issues? Think about this. Your brain is about 2 pounds, 2.5 pounds, and it consumes 20% of your energy intake.
Wow.
Right? When you're stressed, it goes up to 25%. It says, I need more because you're juggling more, so I need more energy. Now, I just told you, if you have increased fat content, percent body fat, right? Even at overweight, 26, BMI 26, you decreased blood flow to all areas of the brain. And it's almost like a linear. The higher the weight goes, the lower the blood flow to the brain, which means that there is a condition of hypoxia, not enough oxygen to the brain cells, and not enough nutrients, not enough glucose to the brain cells. So your brain cells are dying every day. Okay? Yeah, I don't know why we don't talk about this. Okay, so your brain cells are dying every day. All right, great. Now just think about this. Whenever they say, oh, patients are not compliant and things, just think about this. Okay, you have a brain, it's struggling. And at the end of the day, you've been busy all day, you got the kids to pick up, finish your project, blah, blah, blah. And there's increased demand, in terms of cognitive functioning, right? But you can't increase the blood flow, right? Your blood flow is fixed, it's decreased. But what can you manipulate? You could manipulate the concentration of nutrients, for example. Yo, buddy, go get that donut. Because per unit flow to your brain, if we have a higher concentration of glucose, brain says, that works for me, right? And so we go, oh, I don't have enough willpower. I don't have enough. I'm like, it has nothing. Your brain is saying, go get something because we are starving and dying, right? And then, not to put anybody down, but honestly, sometimes I hear this, I don't know where this comes from because there's no research. But then we have this intuitive eating. Let me tell you, intuitively, your brain is, I want to stay alive. So go get that donut. And then we blame the patient. I'm like, did anyone look at the physiology? Right? This is the kind of stuff that gets me frustrated because we talk about obesity, but we don't understand what is actually going on, basic physiology in the body. And then we treat it like some big mystery. Patients not compliant, don't know why, they don't have enough. I'm like, yo, just understand what's going on in the body. But again, we're just trained in a paradigm of when you see A, do B, when you see this, and that kind of thing, AI deserves to take over. Deserves to, because why the heck? Why do I need that? I can look anything up. I don't want to have to memorize an algorithm. Please, AI, take that. What they can't replace, I think, is just the humanity of practicing as a physician, the thinking, right? The looking at the big picture and assessing. That is still going to be hard for AI at this point, maybe in the future. But what I'm saying is the easy part is the algorithm.
Sure.
They're welcome to have it. I don't care. Right.
Yeah, I think we certainly probably share that opinion about the algorithms and what worth they are. And I've said the same thing to many of my colleagues. If all you're doing is following some algorithm, then, what are you doing? What do you need it for?
And it's all guidelines, Phil. It's guidelines, not based on outcomes. Guidelines. It's just somebody's guidelines, right?
Exactly.
But not on actual outcomes and benefit to the patient. This is what they don't point out. The guidelines say, but the guideline means shit, which, by the way, Jack, is a medical word. So I say it frequently.
Oh my gosh.
It's allowed, yeah. So I guess, there might be some people thinking, okay, that all sounds really good. And, Vyvyane's obviously very smart and she thinks deeply about this. But, like you said, outcomes. We got to help the patient ultimately in front of us. So how does that help us? What do we do with that? If we come to that recognition, what do we do with it to then help that patient in front of us who is battling with obesity?
I think, and that's a great question. So Phil, this is the first thing I want to do is explain to the patient what's going on because they're already blaming themselves. They think they don't have enough. I don't know why. I know what to do. And they're really harder on themselves than anybody else. I treat a lot of my patients and my heart goes out to them because they're really kind of blaming themselves there. And the first thing I want them to understand is this is your physiology. And it's a huge relief when they can actually understand that, right? And remember what I said, our full-time job is to tell people things they don't want to hear. But now, if they understand it, they're open to hearing what they could do. And I'm like, at this point, we need to prioritize keeping as many brain cells alive as possible. All right. So the nutritional aspects, the sleep, all you people thinking that, oh, I don't like the CPAP. I'll use my, CPAP for my sleep apnea, once in a while. Yeah, I don't get that with my patients. I have a lot of compliance because they're understanding. I'm like, those brain cells, yeah, they're dying already. And if we have sleep apnea on top of it, we're making it worse. So that understanding is no small feat because we can make I said this, I was at a conference 2 weeks ago. I said this, we can make all the treatment plans we want. The only person who can carry out the plan is the patient. And at this point, we give no guidance, no tools, no support. And then we say non-compliant. So if you can really explain it and say, this is what we're going for, that person is more likely to carry out the plan. That's the only person that can carry out the plan. So for me, the education is huge. That's why I spend a huge amount of time on the education, because we need to know what we're going for together. And then I can tell you nutritionally, these are the benefits if we do X, Y, or Z. This is why I need you to work on your sleep. And, this is why you need to be using your, let's say, CPAP device if you're on that. And then we have to manage your stress because that's going to be an increased energetic demand on your brain. So how do we manage that? So now we have a framework and we can use that framework. It becomes very useful for the patient because they understand what we're going after. And they also now have concrete steps in terms of nutrition, in terms of exercise, in terms of sleep, whatever, concrete steps for achieving that goal, right?
I'm loving this. One of the things that occurs to me is how lucid your explanations are. And I don't have to know a whole lot about science to follow you. And I can't help but wonder if that year of silence and that pursuing a master's of fine arts in writing and actually creating a novel and actually working in a non-science, completely not rationally driven field has strengthened that part of your brain, your cognition, your perception. And physicians who are forced down this hyper rational rabbit trail never.
I'm going to disagree, Jack, because
Okay.
as an undergraduate, I was a double major in classical languages and literature and biology. So I studied Latin and Greek. And it was really my classical studies and translation where it was very small department. So I usually met with my professor one-on-one. A big class was 5 people, right? But he was so exacting in looking at the text, and I had to justify every single translation choice and really kind of dig into the text. So I think a lot of the critical thinking happened when I was a classics student. I got a lot more out of that than I did the biology part because he was the person who taught me how to think. He was very exacting. He'd hand me back my papers. If he didn't see that lucidity and that clarity, he was someone who demanded a lot of clarity of thought. And it was that shaped the way. And that was why I didn't do that well in med school because I went in, I was like, dang, I don't know what's going on here. But there's a lot of memory work in medicine. And it just, those first 2 years were tough for me because I come from an environment where thinking was so prized, and then memory is more prized in med school to a large extent. And that's what, Phil, I mean, I'm sure you take these are really bright people to be able to get into and then you just dumb everything down. And you just kind of dampen everyone's spirits at that point. It's just about passing the damn exam. Who cares? It's not about really seeing the connections. And that was the part that really disappointed
But
me.
it's the connections that I'm thinking of.
Yes.
The split brain, the bicameral brain, the model is that one side is rational, mathematical, moral, judgmental, and the other side is irrational, nonverbal, but a pattern recognition machine. And I can't help but think that your dance, your choreography, all the creative work that you're doing.
Okay, now that's really interesting because movement and cognition are linked, right? And now a lot of, we used to do these, what you call it, Phil, those mini mental status, the cognition screens to screen for dementia or cognitive impairment. We used to ask you, remember these three words, apple, chair, table. Remember that? And what year is this? Who's the president? And there were a few years in residency. I didn't know the president because I never stepped outside. But the point was that we used to do these screens and ask these dumb questions. And we've actually replaced them with movement screens. We want to look at how fast you walk, how you get out of a chair, for example, how you do what they call timed up and go, stand up from a chair, walk, turn around, come back and sit down. Because the movement, the quality of your movement, the speed of movement relates to processing speed and, gray matter volume in your brain. And so movement is actually, the more movement you have, it's actually a higher sort of activity for the brain. And, if you look at it, dance is the only activity that improves dementia symptoms, right? So playing chess doesn't help playing the piano. It's dance because of the,
It's a
I
whole
guess,
body movement.
yeah, it makes your brain really, you're judging what's upright, you're judging distance, you're listening to music, there's rhythmic patterns, you're coordinating. It's like, it's much better than, like a computer, puzzle or something like that. And so when you want to build neuroplasticity, you should really be encouraging people. So I have my patients like eat with chopsticks if they're not used to it. If you know how to eat with chopsticks, eat with the chopsticks in your non-dominant hand, right? Walk around the block in the opposite direction you normally go. Brush your teeth with your non-dominant hand. So have them do just simple things to build neuroplasticity. Because again, we have this decreased blood flow, so the brain is shrinking. And we actually do have atrophy of the brain. So the brain does shrink over time. And this leads to cognitive impairments, right? So having them build in some neuroplasticity with movement. So I'm really a fan of movement. And I just try to move all day. Like I know I'm standing here doing a Zoom with you. I think, Phil, you're standing too, right? I rarely sit. And I try to move and I try to do complex movements, right? Non-dominant hand, do something unexpected. And of course I dance too, but my point is I try to make my patients aware of that and guide them towards that, right? So these are things that we know in neuroscience helps the brain. But again, why don't we bring it to our patients? This is the kind of thing, it's not that difficult to brush your teeth with the other hand, right? It doesn't cost anything extra. No extra toothpaste even, right? Except the stuff that drops
So you
on.
miss, the stuff you miss with because you can't do it. But
That's right.
very. I mean, this has just been a fascinating conversation. I guess, maybe just one practical point we'll hit on, because a lot of what I hear you often pointing out and talking about is maybe, let's say, the inexactness of the measurements that we sometimes use in assessing certain things. And I'd love to, we're not going to get into it today, but we'll probably put a pin for part 2 of this conversation sometime about the whole lipid discussion. But I know you talk about BMI, body mass index, and, how when it comes to obesity, maybe it's not the right thing to be looking at.
Yes.
And body composition is really what, we should be interested in. Talk a little bit about that and as we kind of start wrapping things up.
Thanks, Phil, because that's something I really want to get across, is that by BMI, if we look at 2018 numbers, 42% of Americans have obesity, okay, by BMI. But honestly, if we go by percent body fat, it's going to be about 90%. So you walk in a room, 10 people in the room, 9%, 9 people in there have obesity. And that's because we're missing normal weight obesity. The people who step on the scale, they're normal BMI, normal weight, and they think they're fine. But I don't care what weight you are, if you're 100 pounds, soaking wet, but you are 40% body fat, you have obesity. Duh. You shouldn't be 40% body fat. You should have more muscle. Okay? And this is going to have profound metabolic implications in your body. where's that glucose going to go? It usually goes to muscle. The less muscle you have, the more it spills out in the bloodstream. Hello. So my point is that when we just look at the number and the scale and this whole Ozempic thing and everybody's, oh, the weight, how much weight did you drop? But understand that every time you lose weight, everybody knows this, they should, you're losing muscle and fat. Okay, you're always losing some muscle. All right, bad news again. Every time you gain weight, sorry, you're only gaining fat mostly, unless you're really working towards building some muscle. But as we age, it's very hard to do because of our hormonal status and so forth. So primarily, you lose weight, you lose muscle and fat. You gain weight, you gain muscle. So over time, we are actually changing our body composition and becoming more fat and less muscle. And if you lose 5 pounds of muscle, gain 5 pounds of fat, you will be weight neutral. You step on the scale and you're the same weight and you're happy, but you have changed profoundly in terms of metabolic regulation in your body. When we're not paying attention to this, we don't realize that more people are sick than we thought. Instead of 42% obesity, we have closer to 90% obesity.
Good grief.
Right? And now, yeah, that's a whole different thing to contend with. And that's a whole different approach that we need. So coming back from this conference that I just gave a talk on the fat muscle bone axis in metabolic health, my main point was all of us are missing the normal weight obesity patients. Okay. And those are the ones, he was so healthy, just killed. Oh, I wonder, we all know one or two of those. They were jogging every day. They seem so, and then what happened? Genetic. No, we missed the normal weight obesity, right?
Wow.
Because those people still have impaired blood flow, even though they look thin. They still have fatty liver. They still have metabolic abnormalities, the diabetes and so forth. Look at all the Asians that are skinny. Right? I remind you that bariatric surgery in Thailand was, not so much actually wasn't for weight loss, it was for diabetes, right? Because it was, again, normal weight obesity that we're seeing. So nobody talks about this. And that's something I'm glad
The first time I've ever heard the phrase.
Yeah, and I just want to get it out. So thank you, Phil, for actually bringing that up. It's a big point that I want people to stop thinking about the number on the scale and start thinking about what you're made of. And how do we optimize that so we have less fat, we have more muscle and bone?
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, all of that correlates, like you said, with the underlying metabolic issues, that come with normal weight obesity.
Absolutely.
And, the consequences. This has been an amazing discussion and I really enjoyed it. I know people are going to want to connect, find you, see how you work with people. So where should they go for that?
They can just go to my website, which is simply my name, VyvyaneLoh.com. So I'll spell it because my name is spelled a little differently. It's VyVyaneLohMD.com. VyvyaneLohMD.com. And yeah, I work with people who are interested in improving their metabolic health and also in training, physicians and so forth who want to learn how to do this. I do that as well. I have a training program for physicians. So or PAs and so forth. So if they're interested, they can go to my website, send me a note, and I'll get back to you.
All right. So if you're Joe Sixpack like me and you hear this and you really want to get a hold of things, go to Dr. Loh's website. And if you're a healthcare practitioner and you're hearing stuff that makes the bells go off and you go, I got to learn this, go to Dr. Loh's website. We'll make sure that this information shows up in the show notes.
Thank you.
Phil, I realize it sounds like I say this after every single guest, but this one in particular, I'm enraptured over this human being who's taken this path and lays it out so clearly. I heard things today that made it all make sense that I think I really didn't get it before, but I got some things today.
I'm glad.
So
that's why we keep doing this week after week. I really enjoy it as well. And just all these amazing people that I feel blessed to be able to interact with, learn from, have some of these conversations with. It's really what's been fun about doing this podcast and also being in this space of medicine where I think we're thinking differently about things. I think when
Absolutely.
when you look at the metabolic health space, what I see is challenging the norms and recognizing where we're failing and how we can go about changing that. Excited for what the
I'm glad you're
holds.
on our team, Phil.
Yeah.
All right, well,
Likewise.
I'm going to beg you to promise to come back right here.
Oh, be my pleasure.
Okay, we got it, Phil. We have a commitment from her.
Very good.
I'd love to.
We'll do series of chapter 2 of this conversation. There's so many things I want to ask you about, but it'll have to wait.
Okay.
All right. For Dr. Vyvyane Loh and Dr. Philip Ovadia, this has been the Stay Off My Operating Table podcast. Thanks for joining us. They're all like this, so you ought to subscribe and get reminded. We drop
Do it. Subscribe
every Tuesday. We'll talk to y'all next time.
Chances are you wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you didn't need to change your life and get healthier. So take action right now. Book a call with Dr. Ovadia's team. One small step in the right direction is all it takes to get started. Contact us at ifixhearts.com/talk. That's ifixhearts.com/talk.